my children yesterday also.
A nice thing.
Morning.
Good, how are you?
Good.
Okay.
Good. Is that the refrigerator there? No.
Yeah, they're in the fridge.
Would you like one?
No, I brought one from downstairs, thank you. Yeah, over there. So does breakfast look good?
You know, there weren't finished putting all of it out, but it was quite a spread. They had bagels and muffins and fruit.
Oh, okay.
Zoom up and running?
Yeah, yes.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
You know, there's a way to make, I mean, make
Well,
this
Make the screen full.
Oh,
single view and then full screen.
Thank you, that's much better.
switch down. I'm supposed to be Joyce's back up.
Okay.
So
that's, yeah, so just see there's a.
Yeah.
So we're gonna solve the Middle Eastern crisis.
Or view.
Next week.
Exactly. Oh, well, yeah, it's a
We're
two-week
gonna
process.
talk about it today.
I mean, it's
Solve
not
it
gonna,
next
no,
week.
it's not gonna get done by today,
Well,
but
then
but
we
by
should
next
have-
week, it'll all be good.
We
Everything will
should
be
have
fine.
some Palestinians and some Jews in our group.
So we have this interesting overlap a little bit with the breakfast and this, but maybe you have a soft start. And people might bring some food in. I told them, encourage them to do that. So.
Hello, that sounds good.
Good morning.
Well, good morning.
Morning, Edna.
I wish that I could have been here last week, but I did listen, I did watch the YouTube video
See, here we
because,
go. Good example.
because learning how to listen to each other is critical to this particular topic.
Oh my gosh.
However, I wrote a lot. This is going to be, good morning. This is going to be an extremely text-heavy PowerPoint presentation, which is like that's like the cardinal sin of PowerPoint presentations is too much text heaviness, but it helps me to see where I'm at least trying to go.
And it might be helpful if you,
Yeah,
because it's all gonna be there.
You had left it on your chair. I wasn't sure if it was for the church or you, an error. You could decide.
Okay.
Yeah, we're, no, we're not
I'm
gonna-
gonna cut the story.
We have- Thank you.
People will be coming.
Lindsey, have you already announced the
The topic.
okay, so,
Well, I will.
okay, yeah, if you could say the date,
Yeah.
and,
That's
Yeah.
definitely a good idea.
Yeah. So you're gonna be looking this way.
of the stand we had for her iPad, yeah.
Watching.
Good morning, everyone. I know that we are all, I know that we're all still getting settled. My name is Lindsey Paris-Lopez. And it is September 29th. And today we're going to be talking about and praying for peace in Palestine and Israel. I have set myself up with a very ambitious topic. And I seriously doubt we will get through half of the content that I have squeezed into this presentation, especially if we actually talk instead of just me talking. So I will do my very best to try to listen as I speak. This conflict is very, it's probably weighing on all of our hearts and minds. So I come to it from the perspective of someone who was raised or who grew up with Muslims for best friends, and that's a whole other chapter of my life that I will probably discuss in more detail later, but I grew up mainly hearing and understanding the Palestinian perspective on the conflict. And that is where I am coming from. So I will try to keep listening to everybody else's perspective too.
In a purse.
Yeah, it's okay, it's okay.
What's yours?
No,
Okay.
there we go. I'm gonna go ahead and, before we get too deep into it, I wanna open with prayer. So, most gracious, most merciful God, who taught us to love our enemies so that all enmity may cease. Grant that the light of your love may outshine the fire of bombs bursting in air over Palestine, Israel, Lebanon, and throughout the world. Shine so brightly as to illuminate the humanity of those trapped in the dark terror of violence, so that upon recognizing their sisters and brothers, all who are fighting may drop their weapons. Help us here in the United States to cease funding arms that destroy and instead invest in arms that embrace, in diplomacy rather than devastation. We seek an end to all hostility, violence, and dehumanization. Where there is enmity, plant seeds that can grow into friendship, nourished by understanding and compassion. We wish not merely for a tense and tentative pause to the fighting, but for a new foundation of love on which all new reality of peace may grow. We dare to ask for the impossible, because in you all things are possible. Amen. So, yeah.
I'm signaling to Lois.
Sit right down here beside me. Thank you. So some critical context for peacemaking. This is what I was saying a little bit before we got started. I'm trying to express the fact that I'm approaching this from a perspective of love and prayer for everyone, a perspective of seeing the humanity in everyone, while also recognizing clear power imbalances and injustice. Real peace is not possible without recognizing some devastating truths. So I want to ask, what comes to mind when you hear the words Israel and Palestine or Israeli-Palestinian conflict? Sorry, what? Trouble, okay.
Hate.
Been going on for a long time.
Been going on for a long time.
History, yeah.
History, long history, maybe intractable
Resentment,
division, hopelessness.
and
Water.
and someone else started it.
Someone else, yeah, the idea that it's not
actually dividing up the countries,
That's okay,
after the
yes,
war.
that, not just, yeah,
establishing the
There's-
state of Israel.
right. Yes, that was an outside party.
Our close friends,
Our close friends.
here,
Mhm.
you know, the war is going on, but we have Jewish friends, we have other friends, and it's conflict,
Yeah,
personal conflict.
personal, the way it touches all of us.
And safety for
Safety,
those we know, and
safety for everyone. So even the phrase Israeli-Palestinian conflict seems to imply a symmetry that really has never existed. Israel's existence came at the expense of the Palestinians. Many were killed and over 700,000 were expelled during the 1948 Nakba. And the 1948 Nakba has continued into the present. And Israel controls the lives of the Palestinian both within its borders and in the occupied territories of the West Bank and Gaza. And so we're approaching a year of the anniversary of the October 7th tragedy. But October 7th and its aftermath cannot be understood apart from the context of an occupation that is 76 years old, and then a broader movement which goes back to about the late 19th century. But further crucial context is the devastating violence is the victimization of the Jewish people throughout history that culminates in the Holocaust. So while Zionism predates the Holocaust, and it's important to recognize that because Israel was not created only as a consequence or as an answer to the Holocaust. It was in the making long before that, but the importance of Israel to Jews worldwide as a refuge cannot be understood apart from the Holocaust. And the Holocaust, of course, cannot be understood apart from generations, centuries of victimization. So we will more on that to come. The late Arab historian Edward Said referred to the Palestinians as the victims of the victims. So two communities are interlinked in the suffering that they've experienced and caused each other. How can these intertwined peoples laying claim to the same land find a pathway through their sufferings from enmity to empathy, from fear to understanding and trust, and build peace and community on the ashes of oppression and war? Furthermore, what is our responsibility as Christians and as US citizens for peacemaking and atonement? We're more entangled in this quagmire, and this is on the brink of total devastation. And honestly, Gaza and perhaps Palestine as a whole are on the brink of annihilation. And the stakes are you know, it's as bad as it can possibly be. And we're more entrenched in it as Christians and as US citizens than we may realize. So the urgent matter at hand, we know what's going on. We see the news, but some key highlights. So after Hamas's devastating October 7th attack, in which 1,200 Israelis were killed, primarily by Hamas, but also by crossfire, and 240 Israelis were taken hostage, Israel launched a full-scale assault on Gaza, and that assault has extended to the West Bank and Lebanon. The official death toll of those killed in Gaza is over 41,000, but the Lancet, or a medical journal, warns that indirect deaths from hunger, disease, exposure, not to mention those who are wounded and die later. In recent conflicts, these kinds of deaths have ranged from 3 to 15 times as much as direct deaths. So the Lancet Journal conservatively estimates the likely death toll is closer to 186,000. But this is in one of the most densely populated places on Earth, if not the most densely populated. This is a population that is trapped, cannot leave the area to which it's confined. They have been exhausted running back and forth, evacuated from one place to another since this began almost a year now. And the entire infrastructure, hospitals, schools, shelters, sewage systems, everything has all been destroyed. So it's hard to fathom the exact death toll. It won't be known until the smoke clears, but I believe that the Lancet Journal's estimate is still a drastic underestimate. That's pretty much what I've been saying just now. And the effect of the bombardment has been not only the death and displacement of the people, but a partial cultural erasure. Genocide, yes. Yes, the International Court of Justice ruled it a plausible genocide on January 26th. While that language might be controversial, I believe it to be a definite genocide. But whatever language we use, Gaza is gone. The infrastructure is completely destroyed, and estimates are that it will take 10 to 15 years once the fighting is done just to clear the rubble, which is filled with unexploded ordnances and poisonous materials. So it's a very dangerous job. And the surviving Palestinians won't be able to live there. It's become unlivable. So there will be a massive refugee crisis. And it will happen to a people who were already refugees and the descendants of refugees. The Israeli military campaign has expanded into Lebanon. That's not really, it's not particularly new. It's just escalated very heavily over the last year. One of the reasons this whole issue is so close to me, besides the fact that I grew up with Muslims and hearing that perspective throughout my life, which was in the mid to late 90s. In 2006, I went to Jordan to study Arabic, and that happened to be the time of the last major bombing campaign by Israel on Lebanon. And so I was there, and Hezbollah, like the reasoning behind the bombardment was Hezbollah capturing a couple of soldiers and killing about 8 more in a cross-border raid. But that happened also within the context of Israel taking Lebanese nationals prisoner. But the first Israeli reaction that I saw was the bombing of the airport. And I knew then that the goal would be to, that keeps the civilians from getting out. So that was the first thing I noticed. And I felt a little bit uneasy. I mean, I felt very upset by the whole thing, but I felt uneasy for my safety because it was the first time I had been so far away and I was in that area, but I soon realized that I was safe in Jordan. But yeah. So right now, a plausible genocide is expanding into an all-out regional war that our tax dollars are funding. I feel like I should pause for comment or questions, but or I can just go on. All right. So I have a timeline of certain events on the creation of Israel and the history of the conflict between the peoples. But before I get to the timeline, I want to present a caveat on the importance of separating anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. So, because the historical conflict can be viewed in terms of Zionism and resistance to Zionism, but that begs some questions. What is Zionism? So I want to know what others' impressions of Zionism are, and they may have changed over the course of the last year, but I want to know what do you think of when you hear the word Zionism? And I will also say that this is a loaded conversation. This is the most volatile topic I can think of. And any answers are safe here. And
What state code says in this room, stays in this room.
well, we are being recorded, but that should be
Wear a
where
mask.
but but the impressions of Zionism can range from very, very positive to very, very negative. And I do have a personal perspective on it, but Palestinian comedian Sammy Obeid, has anyone heard of him or seen his YouTube clips? He's hilarious, and he says it best when he says, I don't use the word Zionism, not because I don't know what it means, but because nobody knows what it means. He points out, for some it means simply Jewish self-determination, and nobody is against that. Or I should correct myself. There are people who are anti-Semitic who would be against that, but I'm not. And I don't believe anyone in this room is. For others, it's about believing that Jewish self-determination requires a nation state. And when you start to blend self-determination with the right to nationalism, it gets a little bit more dicey. And for others, that nation state must specifically be in the land of Palestine with a Jewish majority. And then there's Christian Zionism, which is basically all Jews proceed to the Holy Land so that the apocalypse can commence. That's scary. And when I was in Jordan and seeing the violence up close, not in person, but the Arab news channels, I'm sure showed much more of it than I would have seen in the United States. Anyway, it was so devastating, and my fiance, now husband, sent me articles of Pastor John Hagee praising what was happening, and that was my introduction to Christian Zionism, the idea that there were Christians who were cheering some of the violence. It struck me so hard that I wrote my thesis about it. So Zionism, as in the movement to establish a Jewish state in the land of Palestine, which is basically how I'll be using the term, began gaining traction in the late 1800s. But Christian Zionism actually goes back further. And from the beginning, the founders of Zionism knew that the only way to establish a Jewish state in Palestine would be to displace the Palestinian population by armed force. There is plenty to support this claim, but there's also a narrative that there were no Palestinians, that it was a land without people for a people without land. And I do believe that some people who went to the new state of Israel believed that and didn't think they were displacing anybody. And that's part of why the confusion over that is part of why it's so hard to start, because people are coming from different premises. So what is anti-Semitism? Well, from Britannica Online, hostility toward or discrimination against Jews as a religious or racial group. It's important to remember that Arabs are also Semitic peoples, but when we hear the term anti-Semitism, it usually applies to Jewish people, and it was coined in Europe where they were talking about Jewish people. So, so a lot of anti-Semitic history and sentiment is specifically anti-Jewish. It is crucial to avoid conflating prejudice against people with critique of political policy. So what is anti-Zionism? Oh, it goes on here. So because Zionism means different things to different people, so does anti-Zionism. Some will argue in good faith that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism because there are people with anti-Jewish prejudice who conflate the terminology of Jew and Zionist. Some make the same argument in completely bad faith to stifle any critique of the state of Israel. There are Jewish people who proudly claim the title of anti-Zionist to stand against not only Israeli policies, but the principle of a land built on the displacement of others and the continual suppression of Palestinians. And as I speak, I just want to acknowledge that we are on indigenous land that is not our own. So, you know, the same thing. If we want to be anti-racist, if we want to claim anti-racist, we have to see the parallels to our own story, to our own history in this. While being sensitive to the understanding that Israel is necessary for Jewish security. And I say the understanding of that, not that I understand it that way, but that I acknowledge that people do. And I am sensitive to that. Therefore, sensitive to people who consider themselves Zionist out of love for the Jewish people. So it's important to be sensitive to that. It is also important to consider the way anti-Zionist is claimed by those who have been displaced, injured, or oppressed by Zionism in its current form. With a word that can have such a broad range of meanings, I want to avoid calling myself anti-Zionist, even though I stand in solidarity with the Palestinian people. But I would never tone police anyone who wanted to claim that title. Does that make sense? Okay, so.
Excuse me, it seems like that word is very much dependent on how you define Zionism.
It is, absolutely.
And if you think that and I've always thought of Zionism as a military Jewish attitude.
Okay.
And in that case, I'd be anti-Zionist.
And I would
and
too
so
under
you
that
can see how
definition.
Words really can trap you.
Absolutely, absolutely. Actually, Edna called words a trap once, and I thought that's true. So I heard that from you first, but you just said it too. Yes.
When you think of anti-Zionism, I think of Emil Hirsch,
Yeah.
the great rabbi of Chicago Sinai congregation, who was among many anti-Zionist Jews who thought that it was not a good idea to put all the Jews back into the Middle East to be battled against.
He could see that, yeah, he could see it happening.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There is no way to ingratiate yourself to your neighbors by coming into someone's home and kicking them out. All right.
It really is illogical, isn't it?
So it is essential to separate Zionism from Judaism and not conflate anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism. That is absolutely essential. Conflating anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism makes more people identify as anti-Jewish. If you think that to be a Jew is to support the current policies, I mean, it's important. It's just very important to know that that is not the case. And it's very, very, very crucial to know that. Like I said earlier, anti-Semitism got us into this mess. It was a big part of fueling this conflict from the very beginning. Conflating Zionism and Judaism will just perpetuate and deepen the quagmire that we're already in. Oh, look, there's Arthur Balfour. Here's a timeline of some crucial events. So in the late 1800s, before Zionism gains traction as a movement to establish a Jewish homeland in Palestine, the Ottoman Empire controls the land of Palestine and way beyond. Jews and Christians are small minorities, while Muslims have made up a majority of the population for hundreds of years. I mean, even predating the Ottoman Empire, it was a land of Christians, Muslims, and Jews, and some other minorities too. And there was a lot of bloodshed throughout the history, but during the Ottoman Empire, it was more peaceful and more, you know, there was a peace, there was a harmony, there was, you know, neighborliness. So the situation in Palestine was livable for the people involved. And that's not to say there were never tensions, but it was livable.
How long a period was that?
I really, you know, I hesitate to say how long there was peace. I read the book a long time ago, Jerusalem, One City, Three Faiths, and it takes me through the entire, it goes through pretty much the entire history up until the book was written. And it's by Karen Armstrong. And it really goes from conflict to conflict, but during the Ottoman Empire, there was peace, but I'm not sure if it was at the onset of the Ottoman Empire or much later. By the time, and also not just in Palestine, but in the greater, broader Middle East, where there was an exodus from Jews from Middle Eastern countries into Palestine shortly after the Nakba, shortly after the creation of Israel. The narrative is that the Arab lands kicked them out because there was so much hatred and division. But if you read things like Avi Shleim's memoirs, he's an Iraqi Jew, it presents a very different story of peace and harmony. But I don't want to, I honestly don't know when that started and how long it lasted. But the picture that is presented by these images are by memoirs like Avi Shleim and others present a picture of living in harmony. Okay.
Thank you.
Sorry, that's a long way to say I don't
I
quite
have
know.
questions in every topic.
I appreciate that. I'm so glad.
And I think that we restrained ourselves.
Oh gosh, yes. So Zionist leaders strategically aligned themselves with Great Britain during World War I, and the Allies win, and the Ottoman Empire is not allied with the Allies. It's against the Allies. So they lose, and that dissolves the Ottoman Empire, and the Zionists, and I say Zionists very specifically because it's not all Jews of the area, but the Zionist leaders align themselves with Great Britain, and they argue that it is to the benefit of Western civilization to give the Jewish people homeland in Palestine. And those arguments persuade Arthur Balfour, who makes a very short declaration. This is kind of seen as like the pivotal event and it just reads, His Majesty's government view with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, and will use their best endeavors to facilitate the achievement of this object, it being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of the existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine, or the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country. And as Edna was saying a little bit earlier, I think there were some Jews who knew from the beginning that that was impossible. That it would prejudice and affect the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in other countries. I mean, it became a place where people thought they could solve their own prejudices by offloading the people somewhere else. So it was not, from the beginning, it was not, there was a darker side to it than the safe haven that a lot of people saw it as.
Well, actually, it seemed to me that at the end of World War II, it was a convenient place to get rid of the Jews that were leftover Jews from
Exactly.
the Holocaust.
Yeah,
There were people alive, but the United States didn't want any more. It was politically not good. And Europe didn't want any more. They had too many already, millions of displaced persons anyhow. And dumping them in Israel was what they did.
Mhm. Yes. Yeah, exactly. So from 1919 to 1933, wave of Zionists immigrate to Palestine and the Jewish population. It says Jews now hold 12% of the population. I copied this from a timeline from a book by Avi Shlem. I trust him as a historian, but I'm not sure what he means by Jews now total 12%. I think he means in 1919 at the beginning of this, not at the end. I think it grew to larger than that by the 1930s. So based on other things I've read. Britain is given Mandate Palestine in 1920, and it's approved by the League of Nations and comes into full force a little later. And British rule helps facilitate Zionist ambitions. It divides the Palestinians, it suppresses revolts because there are revolts, there are violent revolts. Prior to the large influx of Jewish immigration, there was a relative peace and harmony, but when it became clear to some, not to everyone, but to some, that this was an effort to really take control of the land, then some people started pushing back. And the British Mandate divided up the Palestinian leadership, and they did it sometimes by bribing different members of the same family to divide families against each other, but then they also arrested and deported some of the leaders too, so that there wasn't so that they had control over any kind of resistance. In 1947, that was when the United Nations adopted Resolution 181 to partition Palestine, and originally Jews were given over 55% of the land, despite making up only about 30% of the population. Palestinians rejected the partition, which makes sense because they were the ones being displaced by it. And it also makes sense that Jewish people would accept it, even wanting more, thinking they'll take what they can get and press for more later. That all makes sense. It's just a very practical outcome that happened. War breaks out in early 1948, but the Palestinians are ill-trained and ill-equipped, whereas Zionist military groups are backed by both the US and the Soviet Union, both the big superpowers of the world. And they're stronger, and mass expulsion campaigns begin. This is between 1947 and 1948. I just threw this in here. There was a point at which the UN Security Council called for a truce. Arab leaders accepted, but Jews rejected. And I put that in because the narrative for so long has been the Arabs rejected everything. But there were truces which Arabs, very tired by then of all the fighting, tried, accepted. So April to May 1948 is Plan Dalit goes into effect. This is a plan from the Zionist military militias, and it's systematic expulsion by massive force. And it includes massacres, most notably in Dar Yassin, where 100 residents are slaughtered. And then flyers are dropped on the town saying, if you don't leave now, the fate of Dar Yassin will be yours. So those things happened. And you still hear that today. You still hear, well, they dropped flyers to tell people to evacuate. To my mind, that is a form of psychological warfare. That's not a warning to, it's not particularly helpful, especially when you have amputated legs or are otherwise incapacitated, or that no matter where you go, you're trapped.
Where is this place in Palestine?
So this is before Israel was on this screen. It's before Israel was declared a state, just before, like right leading up to its declaration.
Where Israel is located.
So this is where Israel is now.
Okay.
These are being evacuated from the places that would become Israel. And but when I'm talking about today, I'm talking specifically about Gaza. There wasn't a big wall around this area. People could flee, but it's different now. It's in some ways worse now because there is a big wall.
Yeah.
May 14th, 1948, Israel is declared a state, and the next day the Arab states fight until January 7th, 1949. So the narrative has been that this tiny country is surrounded and invaded by all of its neighbors, but it's important to recognize that all of this happened, this fighting from other Arab nations, this started after Israel declared itself a state and after the first mass expulsion of Palestinians. So about 3,000 were expelled before this time, and then leading up until January 1949, another 400,000 are expelled. So Rashid Khalidi writes, notwithstanding the widely accepted assertion that the Israeli army was dwarfed by 7 invading Arab armies, we know that in 1948, Israel in fact outnumbered and outgunned its opponents. So they say 7 armies, only 4 entered the territory of Mandatory Palestine. Only 2 crossed into the part that was partitioned to be Israel. And they were massively outgunned and outnumbered. So this is what I was just talking about, the Nakba, the waves of the Nakba. Refugees go to Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, the West Bank, and Gaza, and probably beyond there too, but those are the main places. Those are all surrounding. The West Bank and Gaza, it's important to understand, that is Palestine proper. That is what was supposed to be a Palestinian state, but they could be considered internally displaced. Some were moved from parts of what became Israel into those places. So settler movements in the West Bank continue to uproot Palestinians along with the bombardment of Gaza. So in that sense, the Nakba has never ended. And Palestinians driven from their homes were never permitted to return. And the Nakba scatters the Palestinians. It gives them a sense of identity as, they've all suffered the same trauma, but at the same time, it scatters and divides them quite literally. And the resources are strained. So surrounding countries try to absorb them to various degrees. Jordan offered full citizenship, but the resources of these countries are strained. So the Arab countries both resent them and also, of course, resent Israel, resent the powers that be that got it all together. But they really want to also make peace with Israel because Israel's much stronger than they are, and they've just seen what can happen. So they're in a weird spot of wanting to help, resenting the strain on their resources, and resenting the Palestinians, resenting the Israelis, but not wanting to be as involved as they feel themselves forced to be because there's pressure from all sides. And then there's a 6-day war in which Israel conquers what's left of Mandate Palestine, along with the Sinai Peninsula, Arab East Jerusalem, and the Golan Heights, which are in Syria. So after the 6-day war, everything that was supposed to become Palestine was occupied. And the popular narrative, again, is that Israel is a vulnerable country on the brink of attack, but the U.S. intelligence knew that Israel faced no real threat. Now, and I think the Israelis who made the military decisions also knew that. That does not mean that the people in Israel did not feel threatened. So there's a disconnect between those things, and I'm sure a lot of people were probably very afraid. So a big part of the problem is the very, very real fear that people feel and what is done by governments to encourage that fear in order to stoke war and keep it going. And there's the map from Mandate Palestine, the UN plan. As you can see, the green area would have been Palestine in that second one. But by 1949, so just a couple years after, and really it's more like 1 year, because this is the end of 1947 versus the beginning of 1949. So within just over 1 year, Israel takes much more land than it was originally allotted. And that is now, those areas in green in the third map are what people are talking about when we talk about a two-state solution. Those two areas themselves constituting one state, despite being non-contiguous. And not only non-contiguous, but right through them runs the land of people that, where there's hostility between them. So, and this last picture is just 2009. So that was 15 years ago. And the white areas are where Israeli settlements and other structures have displaced even further Palestinians. So when we talk about a two-state solution, we're sort of talking about number 3. And I know it's time, isn't it, Laura? I hear
It is, but that was just someone else joining us.
Oh, okay. I'm going to wrap up soon, though, because I know we absolutely have to. So when we talk about a two-state solution, the kind of idea in mind is map number 3. The reality is closer to map number 4 and worse now, because it's been another 15 years. And in order to make a two-state solution, the thought is the white space in what used to be the green space would have to leave and make that space green again. So that would be difficult. But there are ideas that I've heard that that very creatively solve that problem. And we'll talk about that more next week. All right, so-called peace agreements. Because we are running out of time, I'm going to skip past this. The peace agreements didn't work because they didn't promise Palestine a state. That's the short of that. So hindrances to peace right now are the enormous gulf between the predominant narrative and reality. Orientalism, which is the term that Edward Said coined for Western perception of the Middle East as backwards. And that prejudice kind of flowed through all of the dealings, all of the agreements, and the West, British and French desires to cut up the Middle East. Anti-Semitism, both real and perceived, and fear are all hindrances to peace. And then, so what can we do? What can we do right now? Well, I think the most urgent thing is to write to our representatives for a ceasefire. That's the absolute immediate thing. Advocate for that. Beyond that, longer term, we as Christians need to come to terms with the anti-Semitism of Christian tradition. And we need to actually atone for it rather than outsourcing that atonement onto the Palestinians. And there could be a whole series about how to do that, but we need to take the steps that will show that we care about the people. And that real safety and real security need not be tied to nationalism. And I really think at this point, I need to go. I know that Laura needs to go.
I'm sorry. I really do. It really is interesting, and I'm so sorry.
No,
Thank you all, though.
I knew this would happen, and this is not a surprise. Thank you, Laura. Oh, next week we will continue. So there's that.
Lindsey, thank you so much. I'd like to recommend a book that you have almost been quoting from. It's called A Palestinian Christian Cry for Reconciliation. Jerry and I went on the cathedral trip to Israel and the West Bank in 2014. And we met, this is a book by a Palestinian Anglican priest in the cathedral who goes clear back to the Bible for the origins of conflict and presents the arguments that Lindsey so beautifully laid before us. And this is from 2009, but I think it could have been written yesterday. It's very, its name is ATEEK, A Palestinian Christian Cry for Reconciliation. If you're interested in background.
Very much.
And with that, I'm going to close